An estimated 10,000 people have sought treatment for addiction with Ibogaine, and recent research suggests that it may be beneficial for a wide range of indications. But how can we explore and develop this potential whilst honouring Iboga's origins as a ceremonial sacrament? This panel, we've now got an extra guest, so this panel will be extended by 15 minutes, and Dr. Palmer's talk will be moved to later on this afternoon. Other than that, please welcome our next panel, Iboga Without Borders, a global perspective on healing.
The moderator. Yeah.
The clicker is in the podium.
Okay, we don't have any click. Okay. Good morning, everybody. How did everybody sleep? Same. Okay. So a couple of adjustments. Juliana is not here, but we do have Sai, who flew in second place. He flew in all the way from South Africa. Julian, who is now speaking, flew in from Australia. So I think he's got you beat by 7 hours. Thank you for joining last minute and getting your visa. So this panel is Iboga Without Borders, and we have representation from all over the world with a concentration in Africa, where Iboga is indigenous and native. I am going to ask each participant to quickly introduce themselves, 30 seconds, your name, company, what you do, and then we'll have a free-form discussion.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. Thank you for the invitation to be here. I'm Bruno Rasmussen. I'm from Brazil. I'm a medical doctor. I work with Ibogaine since 1994. Until now, I have done around 2,000 treatments. In Brazil, Ibogaine is legal, so we can do treatments in a hospital, above ground. So it's nice to work this way because we can focus on the treatment itself and not in avoiding regulations.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Stephane Lasmé, originally from Gabon. I'm a plant medicine investor operator. Started in the cannabis space and evolved or got back home to do work around Iboga, obviously, trying to get Gabon involved and get the world to understand that it started in Gabon. It's been used for 100 years, and why not involve Gabon into the conversation and keep pushing the ball forward.
Yeah. Good morning, beautiful people. My name is Bismark Dadzie, and I'm coming from Ghana, West Africa. So currently, we are ensuring the continual existence of Tabanante Iboga. So we have 120,000 trees planted. And also, we have Volcanga africana, which is native to Ghana, which now we've been able to semi-synthetically derive ibogaine from it. So what we do is that we are trying to bridge the traditional way, because usually in Ghana, we use psychedelics mostly for spiritual awakening. But we know that psychedelics has a lot of therapeutic effect in that matter. So what we are doing now is that we are trying to bridge our traditional way with modern science by semi-synthetically deriving ibogaine from Volcanga. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Simon Anderson, or Sai. I'm with Mpande Ethnomedicine. We're based out of South Africa, but we're also working in Congo and Burundi. We really stand at this intersection of the traditional but also the mystical use of Iboga, and the connection of that as an ethnomedicine, not just as a pharmaceutical, and with its promise for deep soul healing. And how do we make that accessible to the world? And with that, I would like to invite in, as this is a panel on Iboga, the consciousness of Central Africa, the Central African jungles, and the Holy Wood. Iboga, that medicine which has brought so many gifts, and is now coming forth to bring about tremendous healing in the world right now.
Hello, everybody. My name is Colin. I'm here sharing perspectives from Psygen, a global manufacturing partner for psychedelics and psychedelic-inspired medicines. We're based in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and we've been working with researchers, organizations facilitating humanitarian efforts with psychedelics in Canada, Africa, around the world. None with Ibogaine yet, but hopefully soon. And I'll be sharing perspectives from a manufacturing partner.
Fantastic. Thank you all for joining. Maybe we start from the end with Colin, since you have the mic. Just a minute of what have you learned in making GMP Ibogaine? How does that relate to potentially other GMP Schedule I plus substances you are making?
Yeah, it has been an interesting project. Typically within pharma, we're a pharmaceutical company. What we do is really work with pharmaceutical companies to develop new medicines. And typically we go to Thermo Fisher to get, these precursors, and it's very easy. But, to establish a supply chain all the way from Canada out to Africa with limited connections has been an interesting endeavor. The first shipments of our precursors came in a pail that cracked with a white powder leaking out. And, it was just from a guy with a first name. And so over the years, we've slowly started to actually build out that supply chain. And it's important for pharmaceutical investigators that you have a secure supply chain and ensuring a secure medicine. And personally, I'm really interested in both aspects of a synthetic and a more natural product. I think they both have interesting use cases. In a naturalistic setting, I think people will almost always prefer a plant medicine. But in the pharmaceutical environment, what we're trying to do is match a molecule to an outcome. And it complicates that investigation, which is already so difficult. And so, really trying to achieve a balance in how we approach things, both in the mystic and in the scientific, in the synthetic and in the natural, is really what Psygen is, trying to put forth into the world. And how we are able to do that is to work with pharmaceutical companies, academic researchers around the world to provide these medicines.
Fantastic. I'd love you to pass the mic down to Bruno, who's treated thousands of people over the decades. Bruno, what type of Ibogaine have you treated people with the most?
Well, we use HCl Ibogaine. And what we are trying to do in Brazil is that because Ibogaine is not forbidden there, somebody probably forgot to put it in the list. But we have this situation that is not forbidden, but it's not fully regulated. The medical council doesn't like that I work with Ibogaine, but by the other side, our FDA, who is called Anvisa, they don't mind about it, since we import the medication for each patient. So we must import dose by dose in the name of the patient to do the treatment legally. Doing this, it's legal. So it's a tricky situation, because when the medical council calls me, and they call me sometimes, and they say, oh, you are prescribing Ibogaine. It's not regulated. And I say, well, but I must prescribe because Anvisa asks me to prescribe to import. So while they decide, this has been 30 years that I'm now working with it. But what we're trying to do is solve this situation, because some years ago happened a strange situation. I was in the hospital doing treatments, and suddenly the police arrived there. Saying that, oh, you are using a medicine that is forbidden. And I said, no, it's not forbidden. I have the documentation, and I showed them the documentation. And it was interesting because they were very ashamed. I live in a small city. I do the treatments in a small city. Everybody knows each other. So they were really ashamed. They apologized. But this showed to me that I had the need to go further. And so what we're trying to do is to show to Anvisa a research. They asked for a phase 2/3 research to to totally approve it, to register it, as they say, and the Brazilian government, they are interested in turning ibogaine into a public health policy. We have in Brazil a universal health system that gives medicines to the patients, give treatments to the patients. So they are interested in doing this, but to doing this, we must show this research, and to show this research, to do this research, we need to produce GMP ibogaine in Brazil. They are asking for Brazilian ibogaine. For political reasons. So that's the moment we are living in Brazil. We are trying to do this research to fully legalize it, and after that, probably ibogaine will be available in public hospitals. Because nowadays I work in a public hospital. I do treatments there, but patients need to pay for it, and medical insurance doesn't pay. So doing this research, it will change the way things are, and it will be more accessible for people to have ibogaine treatments.
Fantastic. Pass it to Stephane. I have a question. So one of the things that comes up a lot in this space, not just around Iboga, but a lot of indigenous medicines, like who are the first wisdom holders? How do we ensure there's I used to say I'm one woo, like woo-woo in relation to the mystic. I'm one woo. And then I met a psychologist last month who said I'm woo and true. And that's like you have to have some of the holistic, you have to have some of the mystical. Anybody here who's had a psychedelic experience knows that's appreciated. We've seen numerous accounts where within a trial there was an adverse event, which includes bliss. That's considered an adverse event. It's not dependable. Or, immediate joy or orgasm. I'm like, So that's definitely a part of, that psychedelic experience with many of the molecules. But my question is specifically, and the great work you're doing in Gabon, and let me just debrief. Stephane invited me, was it a couple years ago? Whenever I arrived in Gabon, and he's, I think Stephane's really underplaying his, for lack of a better word, celebrity. But I got to witness, the prodigal son returning home, where, and I met his basketball coach, he's growing up, and his family, and all the ministers, and the prime minister. It was like you can tell people were so happy that he's come back and he wants to do something. So how do you, as it relates to Gabon, which at least the narrative right now is that, Bwiti is there, although we see Bwiti in other Central African countries, and Sai, I want to come back to you too after this, but how do you inform, like, this original indigenous of the Tabernacle with everything? How do you maintain that as guys like Colin, are the, I don't want to say big pharma, but doing this very regimented, making the single molecule, not even necessarily from Tabernacle, although there's so many works. How do you deal with, hey, this comes from the earth, but on the pharma level, we have to do a single molecule, and it has to be very regimented. How do you think about that, like bringing that medicine into the mainstream?
That's a loaded question. Just being in the cannabis industry in the States, I got to witness what it means to do medicine from a plant, and the repercussion in society. There's the whole thing about you have to give back to people who have been doing this since the beginning, like legacy people. And I see it developing in different states and how it's not happening. People are trying, but it's not really happening. And I witnessed the conversation around Iboga in different conferences before I got involved with Iboga, before I got involved into finding reset. I've seen the conversation happening, but you just never seen anyone from Gabon who actually understand what's happening in the States and around the world around psychedelics, but also what's happening in Gabon in terms of policies, the government, and the Bwiti leaders, the cultivators, the village, everyone in Gabon who's involved around Iboga. So, I mean, it's difficult, it's a difficult but kind of easy thing to do, because I believe, we truly believe at Reset that you don't want to change something that's natural. So you have to respect the fact that the world, I mean, nature gave us this medicine. Why mess it up? People in Gabon have been doing this forever, and there is a way to do it that's been working. But I see here in this room, in these rooms, people are talking about the danger around it. I mean, people in Gabon know the danger around it, but they worked on it for years. So how do we help translating what they've been doing for 100 years into something scientific? Because clearly my background is in science. I love science since a kid. So to me, it's only something that comes naturally. But now how do you transcribe it on paper? How do you involve science into something that's cultural? Really, that's the work that we at Reset spending the time working on, and hopefully it can be done. I think there is a path to it. I think the medicine is already, like I mentioned earlier, medicine is already perfect as it is. It's true that there is different rules when it comes to the biotech industry, the pharmaceutical industry. There's certain rules to do certain things. I think the rules are already there, and if we want to get the medicine to the public, just want to follow the rules to get it so the people in charge understand that it's real medicine, but while also respecting my tradition, because it's really ingrained in me. It's part of who I am. I couldn't run away from it. I mean, I wasn't thinking about Iboga again 5 years ago, but growing up, it was around me, everywhere. I mean, you talk about it not regarding PTSD or or anti-addiction drug. It's more like you mentioned earlier, it's more like spiritual plan that's help us talk to our ancestors, that help us deal with our own issues as a family, as an individual. So that's the work that we're trying to do, just trying to get what we use for in Gabon into a scientific language that we can into a scientific language that people in the Western world can understand.
Fantastic. Yeah, something I reflect on that, two things, then I want to pass it over to Cy and Bismark to talk about the actual plant, since they put a lot of, seeds in the ground, have been doing it for some time, but I'll let this hang and maybe we can come to a resolution by the end, but the really great intention of writing policy. You had mentioned cannabis. I remember helping draft some of the early social equity programs in Oakland well over a decade ago, where the belief was those who were most affected, those who were most harmed by the war on drugs should be first in line to get a license for a dispensary or a cultivation. I can't think of a single social equity applicant from back then who's still in the game. I can't think of a single social applicant across all the states that are creating these merit-based systems where it works out for them. It looks great on paper. It's the right thing to do, but it just dissolves. So I want to reflect, and maybe we come back to it at the end, of all the different frameworks which come from a good intention, but why did social equity, in my opinion, fail in cannabis? I can't see a single example on what's being created now, what's being agreed upon now that's with the good intention, but might just dissolve because it's too complicated. But to transition, both Cy and Bismark, or Cy, since you have the mic, and we're talking about just riffing on it's natural, it's perfect as it is. How do you approach both the pharmaceutical side and that discussion and the natural plant?
All right.
Or Cy, let me let Cy take this because I want to talk about your cultivation.
Yeah, I've also got a lot to say about this other piece about including traditional people who've been holding this wisdom and bridging that. I'll answer your question first, and then I'll get back to that. The medicine it's really profound. So anybody who's worked with Iboga, worked with root bark, it's 48 hours. You're in as deep as you've ever been, and there's communication channels opening to your childhood, to your past, to your ancestors, to your soul, in different planets, different realms. And then there's also this very deep life review of everything that you've done being reflected to you. And that, it's very hard to now, talk about adverse events, I think it's like one big adverse event. But then we realize that a lot of our lives have been an adverse event, and a lot of our culture's an adverse event. So, how are we gonna repair that? How are we gonna fix that without facing it squarely, without seeing the adverse event for what it is, and then going like, let me start making some different choices. And, this talk about the critical period, what Iboga really does is it gets you out of that loop, and it gives you that opportunity to start making some different choices. Ibogaine also does that. I like to say it's like an orchestra. With Ibogaine, it's more like the flutes and the violins and the kind of the top notes of the orchestra, and you're missing some of the lower notes. And but yet that's very effective, because when somebody comes in and they're really suffering and they're in pain, and they just need this piece to be fixed, then it's useful. But what I would love to see is people getting strong with Ibogaine, getting on their feet, but then being like, well, you think that was good? Come check out this. And so I think there's an opportunity to take it a layer deeper. Talking about the piece around, honoring and this dialogue between the traditional wisdom holders and the money and power and attention that's now coming into the Iboga and Ibogaine space. I think there needs to be more dialogue. I think we need to be having these conversations. We need to be including all the voices, and not all the voices are in the room. People talk a lot about Bwiti representatives. There's also the Pygmy Central African forest people who have never been in the room. And I actually have a non-profit venture called Iboga.org, which is a website. I think the editor-in-chief, Salvia, is here.
Hey.
And that's a place to start these dialogues and to start talking about these things, and how do we bridge these gaps? How do we include everybody? How do we, those first holders of it? How do we speak to that? And what does the full ecosystem look like? Because if I've learned one thing with Iboga, it's we can't isolate. One of the key words in Bwiti is bukaye, and it means we are together. So, while you're eating Iboga, you're saying, bukaye, wenya, we are together as one. And so if we're not together, if we think that we're gonna get some people out of the bucket and not the rest of us, it's never gonna work, because we're not free and happy until we're all free and happy.
Fantastic. Bismark, before I let you answer, I just want to share an anecdote. This was, I can't remember when it was in time, maybe 6 months ago, but we met with the head of chemistry at a university in Ghana, and it was very interesting. I forgot how to say it in Ga or Tswi, but there is a word for neuroplastogen. And the discussion was, this is very interesting, how the Americans, I was an American, he could have pointed to anybody who is not from there, are creating these patentable molecules and drugs to take out two of the pretty impeccable things about the Ibogaine experience, which is one, the hallucinogenic effect, and of course, the second one, where we hear a lot about prolonged QT, and I remember him sharing that, like, oh yeah, I see this study and that study in magnesium, and he's like, dude, my great-grandfather showed me how to do that with the medicine, and it's just, I've already said too much. He's like, if you want to learn how to do it in the natural way to eliminate the prolonged QT, you have to join me in that crocodile place and ride a crocodile. I can't remember the name of it. And he was not joking. Unfortunately, had to get on a plane, so he did not get to ride the crocodiles and get the secret sauce of this other admixture. But I want to reflect on, what I've observed in Ghana, in Togo, and Benin, and other areas where African natural products and Bismark is leading it. So what have you learned around this last point of the difference between the mystical and also trying to, because you run a farm and a product company, this trend to move towards a pharmaceutical, this trend has it affected where maybe say 10 years ago you were just growing root bark, but now you're getting inbounds of, we need GMP for our clinical trials around an indication that, et cetera, et cetera. If you can just touch on that.
Yeah, so for me, I believe we all have a role to play. Like we have Dr. Bruno here, we have Lasmé, we have Sai. We all have a role to play in this whole psychedelic world. So for us, we took it upon ourselves that, in construction, when the foundation is very weak, eventually the building will collapse. So what if we get to the very main top of the fact that now Ibogaine is legal everywhere, and now we don't know where to source it from. So for us, we've taken it upon ourselves to plant more as much as we can while looking for other ways to get the plant. And we got it through Volcanga africana, which is in abundance in Ghana, like 1 million trees available. So we synthesize ibogaine from it. But then we are also trying to make Tabanante Iboga as much as possible, in the sense that currently we have 120,000 plants in the ground. And now we've also adapted a very innovative way in Ghana where it ensures a very good growth of the plant. So we are doing a Iboga in boxes with catfish pond. Okay, how does this relate? So with our catfish, fish go through their own life metabolism, and after releasing metabolic waste in the water, we find it very nutritious to this plant. So to avoid all chemical-based fertilizers and whatever to boost the growth of Tabanante Iboga, we use the fish water to irrigate our plant. And we started it 2 years ago, and the growth is amazing. We've seen, before we were planting it on the field, but because Ghana is not Gabon or Cameroon, definitely the plant is going to miss a lot. By irrigating these plants with fish water, I realize that it's giving it a very massive growth, and our plants are doing amazing. We've been struggling planting Tabanante Iboga. Technically, we started in 2013, but we had a 2 years failure because, Tabanante Iboga has its spiritual side, which you need to go through, obey before you get the plant in the ground. But we're planting it like any other crop, and it wasn't working for us. So we need to consult and get the better understanding of how to treat the plant at its very young stage till maturity. So after doing that, I think we got a very successful rate, and then we kept on planting. So I'm very interested in this whole conversation going on. It's amazing because we all have a role to play. We need to be together, like my brother said.
We must send you some elephant dung from South Africa to help your plants.
Yeah. It's really going to help because we believe that as human, we are what we eat, same like the plant. So if you are feeding this amazing plant with chemical-based fertilizer, in a way, I feel it will get a way into the plant and it will distort the real potency of the plant. So we are going this natural way, which is more sustainable. And with the fishes, they end up in the restaurant. So, yeah. So, yeah, it's also an amazing step we are taking because we know that it's going to take a long time, like 5 to 10 years to get there. But, Iboga takes a very long time to grow. So it's best to start now. So for us, we are open to collaborators, investors, anyone who wants to join us building a very firm and a strong base for this ibogaine industry. Yeah.
That's fantastic. And I just want to comment, because I've been to the farm, and it was really like, mother plant at least 5 years. Why is that? Because we wait for the rain, and then it's dry, and then we wait for the rain, and then it's dry, and you do that 5 years. It's like, what if it was raining all the time? And they came together and they said, what if we had water all the time? What if we watered the plants all the time? So they've created all these catfish ponds around the Iboga forests and the Iboga boxes where there's water, and really nutrient-dense water with, speaking of elephant dung, catfish dung, and it really helps to potentiate and accelerate it. And then the fish, I discovered then, it's like, hey, let's go to this local restaurant, and it was named after one of the founders' military things. I can't remember, but it was like, well, what's on the menu? Catfish. And I was like, so you're creating jobs, you're taking even the catfish, the poop. It was just this really cool example of like how to just do it right, and like doubling your yield. But it provided jobs, it provided food, and the other cool thing, at least in the one town there, it's like I saw teenagers show up, or maybe not everyone looks like a teenager to me now, but younger people on like their first date, and it was like, I'm gonna buy you catfish, and somehow that became the lobster or the tomahawk steak, and it was really cool to witness that. Speaking of elephant dung. Sai, I don't want to lose what you shared around, because it's, again, I've spent a lot of time in those parts of the woods, but I've never been to Burundi. Could you just for a moment, because it gives me the opportunity to say Burundi, what is happening in Burundi for you?
Burundi, it's, we have a psilocybin mushroom growing and export license in Burundi. We've been working on Iboga, so I contacted them about Iboga, and then somehow the conversation got around to mushrooms, and I was like, yeah, it would be really great to get a mushroom growing license, and there's apparently some really interesting indigenous mushrooms in Burundi. The president's into growing mushrooms, and so I said, yeah, do that, but then somehow we became the partner who was helping this happen. But we do see a connection between working with mushrooms and the wood, whereby you can use less Iboga and get the same results, because mushrooms are effectively an infinite resource, while Iboga takes a long time to grow. So if we suddenly need to dose the whole world, we might need to do something there. So that's kind of how it came about, but of course Burundi's on the other side of this Central African tropical forest. And I think that whole place is speaking right now, whether it's Gabon, Ghana, that Central African forest has got so much wisdom. And of course, humanity came out of Africa. So we co-evolved with these African medicines. And so there's a way where I feel like the African medicines, including the psilocybin, humans are more open to them than some of the other medicines, and they take us deeper. So that's what's happening in Burundi, but it's also an incredible place.
Sorry, I just drifted off for a second because I was thinking about, that guy should talk to that guy. And it was threefold. One, it was, just talking about those geographic locations, and one in particular where His Royal Highness Selassie, I hope Rick talks about it at the end of the day, the work in Somaliland, where you have a lot of places that are just, and it's still, there's no PTSD, there's no post. There's always the next conflict, a next civil war. And, we were looking at, the trauma framework Rick is moving forward in Somaliland. And the idea came about that the one rainforest in Ethiopia also has a plant medicine. So there was this interesting thing of, wouldn't it be cool to use the medicine that comes from the cradle of humanity, in that horn in Eritrea and Africa, and how might that be synergistic? But now I'm deviating from being a good moderator. And I'm going to go back to Colin. and ask you a question around, Tabernathy versus Vokanga. So as Bismarck shared, Vokanga is abundant. There's a narrative around all the other alkaloids, right, where in creating, for the great majority of clinical trials right now, it's Vokanga-based ibogaine, around like 98 to 99% with a little bit of iboline and ibomine, and that's what's being used. That's the medicine of choice for the majority of the substance use disorder trials, TBI, et cetera. And because you're playing with biosynthetic and more advanced ways to make it than just a solvent-based extract from the full plant body, there's all these. You're gonna have to help me correct my question because it's now meandering. But the fact that you have this ridiculously abundant source of plant material that gets you what is being used in all, at least the majority of clinical trials and the dozen or so that are planned. I witnessed vocipitine, which you can buy in a Whole Foods or whatever the equivalent is here. They take just the seed of the Vokanga fruit. And this is sold in abundance in China. I witnessed 2 5,000 metric ton shipments. I was at the port of Lomé in Togo and the port of Accra, and that was just one batch. And I was like, what do you do with the rest of it? I'm like, we throw it out. But in that root, in those leaves, are abundant alkaloids. So when you hear that and the plant material versus a biosynthetic method, what happens in inner room discussions with your chemists and all these things about reciprocity or ethics, or maybe there's more in the plant, or just share those thinkings with this whole panel?
I'll try to draw a line through some of the topics that we've been talking about and just bring it to communication and collaboration. And, Bruno speaking about in Brazil and the efforts to, mandate manufacturing there. I've been working in this psychedelic space for 4 years now, and I have seen so much duplication of efforts. And that, to me, is a breakdown of communication and a lack of collaboration. And I think this communication also touches on that point of how do we respect these wisdom holders. And I really view Western society as more knowledge acquirers. And the medical models that we've developed, we saw Dr. Dolan's incredible atlas of an octopus. Like, these are the types of insights that we can gain. But we need to pair that with the wisdom as well. And that comes from a communication and a collaboration. And then I think there's a natural tension that happens too. Anytime, the pharmaceutical industry, this is a business. At the end of the day, these companies, my company, we're beholden to the bottom line and the value system that we bring to the decisions that we make. And I just think that collaboration and that communication is of utmost importance to get the most out of these things. Because we closed our one eye to look through a microscope in Western society, but we really do need to open it up to these immaterial elements, these spiritual elements. When Simon talks about, metaphorically about these experiences and what it means, like, that relates to the human experience. And to me, it's about communication and collaboration ultimately. And, it's about understanding and extracting potential, and we can't do that alone. Like, truth with a capital T is built by the kaleidoscope of humanity. That is not something that comes alone. That's not something that comes from one side. You have to have balance. And to me, that communication is going to be vital to make sure that we do this in the right way and don't just swing entirely into focusing on profits, which I see a lot of leading organizations reducing the importance of psychological support, they're calling it now, and I think the quote was, whatever could mean less than that. And to me, that tells me that the pendulum is swinging too far into, the unbalanced pursuit of profits. And communication will be the way that we bring this to the world in a way that, we extract its full potential, in my opinion.
Yeah, just to reflect on duplicative work. What's so great and humbling to be on this panel, because I get to moderate, I also get to see and know all these dudes. Oh, shit. Another man panel. I just realized that. Nonetheless, not even duplicative, but you're doing that and you're doing that. You guys could shave off 6 months of your time if you just collaborate. Or what did you learn here in this? Or what's that regulatory policy? Even with Bruno, and just like, you know, I'm not going to call him out, but, you know, there's a specific protocol designed. I'm wondering if that protocol designed is based on the Brazilian law of until you get the prescription, you can't. So that preparation time becomes part of, like, the more prep, the better. But I've always been curious, is that preparation time because that's the optimum amount of preparation time, or because from prescribing and then getting the Ibogaine? So, like, just that nuance of you forget how things even come to be, and it's like, oh, you're doing it that way. So many different interconnections.
Yeah,
here.
I think, I mean, what you've just said and what Colin's just said, I think there is a bit too much competition in the space, because we kind of think, you know, we're just trying to get in, and we're trying to launch our business, and I'm doing my thing, but if we get this right, you know, there's no shortage of opportunity, and we'll get it right much quicker if we work together and we share and we collaborate in the spirit of Bukhaya. And I also see huge duplication of effort, and like a little bit of like secret holding, like, you know, okay, I've got this thing and I'm going to keep it over here. But I think if we can collaborate more, it's just going to go faster, and we're all going to be more successful.
Yeah, and let me just second that. Like, everything you heard from the Iboga panel yesterday on the opioid crisis, and, you know, a general view I have, I'm not sure why I have that view, but maybe it's from all the psychedelics, but, like, the pie is so big, and when I see people competing, it's like, well, wait, if a law passes here, or even yesterday at the investment philanthropy evening, Alaska was there talking about their, you know, plans and being the first state to have a potential Ibogaine clinic. And they didn't necessarily know that they received a bunch of opioid abatement money. And then Brian's here, and he's like, hey, I'm leading this Ibogaine initiative called the American Ibogaine Initiative, where we're taking, hopefully utilizing some of the $50 billion plus that was won against Sackler and Purdue, and driving that towards research. And I asked Alaska, I'm like, how much blood money did you get? Like, well, you know, every state got $1 billion. And I was like, oh, I don't know. If it's like, well, how has that been spent? So there was like this immediate, like, wait a minute, we're trying to do this, but there's this amazing narrative. And if we could match some of this blood money, or opioid abatement settlement litigation money, apologies, with public health and some philanthropy, maybe we could, you know, all come up, all work together, all support each other. Because there's, you know, there's about 8 billion of us, right, give or take, and regardless of AI and singularity, we'll be around for at least another 2 or 3 years. So in those 2 or 3 years, before our entire species changes, let's come together. With that being said, we were able to extend this panel to an hour instead of 45 minutes because we didn't get to Q&As. And we did want to allow, you know, in that spirit of community and communication and collaboration, any questions from the audience. So I'm going to ask one last question here, but we do have 14 minutes left. If anybody has questions, I think there's mics on both sides of the stages. There's no question that's out of bounds. It could be the most basic, like how do you spell Iboga, to the most advanced, how have you deuterated the 13th molecule on the Iboga scaffold, to which, you know, what the hell is happening in America with Red Guy, to RFK and those discussions. So if anyone has a question, prepare that. But the one last question I have, and this is one we study a lot, is the underground. And not just bark, but you start to see novelty from two things. One's the need, but then the opportunity. And that opportunistic gene is with any entrepreneur of getting the product out there. What are you guys seeing as relates to other products that somehow, in the same way there's a proliferation, like I can't walk down the street in New York without someone handing me a mushroom chocolate bar. I mean, it's like, that would have never happened a decade ago. What might you be seeing in regards to the ways these drugs, these molecules, these substances find their way into society before a clinical trial is approved, before a law changes and you could just buy it on the shelf. I'm just curious if anyone's seeing, consumer packaged goods and underground stuff, and for what? Because Ibogaine, depending on how you dose it, and then the alkaloid structures has, very different applications. Well, I'll leave that open, and as we wrap up that, depending on if there's any questions, then we'll move to the questions, if that's cool.
Yeah, it's interesting because, with Iboga, people are justifiably, I'd say, cautious about just trying it, unlike, say, mushrooms or cannabis. Yet, in a microdosing form, it's very safe. Under a couple of grams, especially under a gram, it's very safe. And there's so many amazing applications where people don't really know about. Amazing for lovemaking. Amazing combined with cannabis, small doses of Iboga. In Gabon, it's got its own name. It's an entity. The combination of cannabis and Iboga is another medicine. And so there's a lot here. But talking about the mushroom chocolates, I mean, yeah, I think in MAPS there were more grow bags, like the last MAPS, there were more grow bags on the conference floor, and because it's so accessible, you can't keep it down anymore, and it's springing up everywhere.
Excellent. Any other comments on that? And if not, I have one last question to squeeze in. Go ahead.
I'd give a comment on that because as a manufacturer of Ibogaine and the potential risks with cardiac, the potential risks that comes anytime someone's in an altered state and vulnerable. There was a great conversation yesterday around informed consent and boundaries. It really comes down to trying to think about bringing this and merging this, really disparate kind of technology compared to what our society is used to in a way that it'll be here to stay. And I'm a fan of legalization and decriminalization and regulatory reform, but thinking on the proper time scale to where we're incentivizing research to build that understanding to Thomas Kuhn talks about the building of evidence that leads to a paradigm shift, and I think that's what we have the opportunity to do now. And as a manufacturer, we've been asked to supply clinics and things outside of controlled environments, and it's been very difficult to sit there and say no and understand that people won't get access to that medicine necessarily. Even though we know it's of a high quality, it's like we want to solve the problem, and expediency is important, but it's also important to get it right. And there is a lot of baggage that comes here, so doing it in the right way, doing it in a balanced way is what I will continue to say, and that's what I think is really important.
I have a comment too about this situation, about collaborating. I think it's important because, and it's possible, totally possible, because there are different kind of people, and these different kind of people need different kind of medicine. So, for example, when somebody looks after our treatment saying that he or she wants a psychospiritual experience, we refer them to a shaman in Brazil, who is a French guy who comes to Brazil from time to time. But sometimes this shaman, he asks help from us because he has a patient that has cardiac problems, for example. So there's a space for everybody. It's just to really respect the needs of the patients, of the persons, to do this. Another important thing is that Ibogaine doesn't work alone. It's very important to do psychotherapy before and after. So that's why it's good that time to wait for the importation in Brazil. So we, as the medicine will take time to arrive, we have time to do psychotherapy. And sometimes the patient doesn't want to do psychotherapy, but we say, well, but you need to wait, so let's do psychotherapy until it arrives. And this works. And another message that I want to say is that psychedelics work. Psychedelics are medicine. So we here, all of us, we have full responsibility to handle this with care, because there's a lot of people that don't like psychedelics. They don't want them to be totally approved. So we must take care about this. This includes the chocolate mushrooms, although we know that it's safe, it's totally safe. But if somebody takes a chocolate mushroom and gets hit by a car, people will blame the chocolate mushroom. So we must take this with responsibility, with to be very careful about this, because this is a thing that can change the world, and some people don't want this to happen. So it's important that conferences like this happen a lot of times for us to bring everybody together and to work everybody together to achieve a final result that the governments won't be able to fight with the conclusions that if they want research, let's give them research. If you cannot, in Brazil we say, if you cannot defeat an enemy, you must work with him or with them. So let's work together to prove by the ways that they want to be proved that psychedelics work, and let's change the world.
As they say in Brazil, viva! Viva. We'll get to move to a question, but two things I want to remind attendees as relates to alternative uses and just your flood dose. Julian is speaking this afternoon, who plays with Mania, and I believe the second, or even it's superseded Tabernathy. I'm sorry, not Tabernathy, Lamparine, which was used for many years in France as a stimulant for sports athletes. And then Toby will be speaking on Parkinson's and the protocol there, which is also another modality and different dosing structure. But without further ado, and here we go again. I was hoping for 15 minutes and we're down to 6. So we do have one question teed up. Please introduce yourself first.
Hi. I don't think this is turned on.
I will...
I'll just try and be loud.
Wonderful, and I'll repeat it for this.
I work closely with Psy. I'm the editor-in-chief of Iboga Without Borders. And I have a question based on the discrepancy between how we use Iboga in the West and how it's used in Central Africa traditionally. Because a lot of our conversation is about how it's dangerous, it's risky for our heart, it has health complications. And I'm wondering if we see the same rate of health complications with traditional use, and if so, how the story is framed around that, what's said about that in traditional context, and if it's not seen, if there's been any research done into this and anything to explain any discrepancy.
Okay, so let me repeat the question. Hopefully I got it, but it's a comment and a question about the discrepancy of the narrative of how Ibogaine is perceived in the West, which is, medicalized. You have to have the magnesium, the calcium. There has to be 3 nurses. You have to have heart rate monitors. You have to have intake. All of those things, which, Bruno, who works in a hospital setting, has seen. But how that compares against how it's used outside of that context, and are there issues and the same risks? And maybe I'll let Sai answer this question, since these brave folks flew all the way from South Africa, and he could probably formulate what I absolutely messed up in trying to interpret her question.
Could a part of it be that when Ibogaine was first being used, it was being used with addicts who tried everything else, and they were often coming in a very weakened physical state. So, they were coming in with a very weak body, with a body addicted to something. And so the stakes were so much higher, and so there were more heart failures or risks because people were coming in weak. And I'd like to ask Bruno that. Do you think that's because of the origin story of Ibogaine, which was with Howard and working with addicts and working with people who had tried everything else, and this was their last-ditch attempt, detox or die, now I'm going to try Ibogaine?
So Bruno, the question to you is, what have you seen in just one's general health? Like, I've experienced, like, in clinic settings and elsewhere, where it's like, how are you even going to get to tomorrow? You've been shooting fent for, 3 years now. Your immune system's shot. So what do you see in regards to... I'm trying to parse the narrative.
The questions around safety. And, you know, like safety is this huge buzzword and it's so important. And I think it is important, but, you know, when we're starting to deal with a more healthy population, is it as critical? You know, so I think there's an interesting piece to explore there. Because, you know, I know that with healthy people, you know, as long as there's no history of heart complaints, you know, we can give people 40 grams of root bark and they'll be fine. You know, I mean, we notice, you know, that when the tremoring starts, then it's okay, the magnesium's depleted, because it seems like the Iboga is using a lot of magnesium to transport and work with the neural tissue. So it's like, okay, up the magnesium dose and then the tremoring stops. But, you know, I've served, you know, close to 1,000 people with no serious health issues. But I'm serving healthy people. I'm not doing detoxes. So it's different.
Yeah, what I see in all this time working with Ibogaine, I never saw a death. I never saw any complications, even psychiatric or clinical complications. I think the trick is the pre-screening. We do a lot of tests. We do this EKG. But you are right. It's very different to treat someone that is totally healthy or people that is struggling with drug use, because mainly using opiates. But cocaine too, mainly crack cocaine. In Brazil, we have a lot of crack cocaine users and not so much opiate users. But it's important for the patients to arrive to the treatment at the hospital in a good health. So that's another good reason for not rush the importation, because you have this 30 to 40 days to prepare the patients. And for the cocaine or crack cocaine users, we ask them to stay away from crack cocaine. And it seems strange because, well, if I want to take Ibogaine to stop using crack cocaine and I've already stopped it, why I need to use it? But what we see normally is that Ibogaine is useful in the situation of treating stimulant use. It's useful not to bring the patient to the abstinence, but to maintain the abstinence. But to opiates, it's different. You cannot ask someone that's using fentanyl or heroin to stop for 30 days before the treatment. So what we do is switch the opiate that the person is using to morphine, and after that, some hours before, around 12 hours before the treatment, we stop the morphine and the patient arrives at the hospital in withdrawal. So I think this is the reason that we never saw complications, because the main reason for complications, in my opinion, is the bad health state. People that arrive there, you having used the last dose 2 hours ago, 3 hours ago, and in Brazil, not in our hospital, but in other places that use Ibogaine, we have seen that because of this, people go all through the night using crack cocaine and arrives at the facility at 8 a.m. to take Ibogaine, and they are dead at noon. So it's important to select the patient, and if you are not sure, don't do the treatment or postpone the treatment until you are sure. It's better to avoid some treatments, do that to treat a lot of people, to say, oh, I treated a lot of people, but some people are dying, so you're not helping them. But Ibogaine is not so dangerous as people think. Normally, when you have a death on Ibogaine, if you research what happened, you will see that was some kind of subreptitious use of drugs or some congenital problem or some liver problem or heart problem. So if you see Ibogaine like as a small surgery, like an appendicitis or a gallbladder surgery, if you do the same screening, if you take the same care, nothing will happen and everything will go fine.
Excellent. And Sai, I'm sorry we have to cut you off, but I'd love to thank our panelists, Colin from Psygen, Sai from Impanda, Bismark from African Natural Products, Stephane from Steady and Reset, and Bruno from Veracruz. Thank you all for joining the panel, and we'll see you around today.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.